This episode is brought to you by my friend Rebecca Walser, a financial expert who can help you protect your wealth. Book your free call with her team by going to friendofdinesh.com. That's friendofdinesh.com. Coming up, the midterm results. They're pouring in, and it hasn't been a red wave. Probably more like some dark clouds, but dark clouds with a silver lining. I'll explain, and Debbie's going to join me. We're going to talk about it together. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
Guys, you might notice a change of background if you're watching the podcast as opposed to listening to it. And I am in Florida. Now, I'm here to speak at an event tonight. Debbie was like, "Are you sure you want to go to Florida? Isn't there a hurricane coming to Florida? It's a tropical storm now, but who knows what it's going to become." And Debbie's a little bit of a catastrophist. So I'm like, I think I'll be okay. The organizers aren't canceling the event, so I kind of have to be there. I can't leave 400 people at a dinner without a speaker. So I made my way last night to Florida, and here I am in a studio in Orlando. Debbie's actually at our home studio in Texas, and a little bit later in the podcast, I'm going to bring her on. We're going to talk together about some of the things that have been happening in the midterms. Well, what a day! What a night it was last night, and I got to say, it was a rough night, a bad night, kind of like this tropical storm, perhaps. Not a red wave, really. But I would say some dark clouds in many ways, but dark clouds with some silver linings. Now, I don't think this is something where we need to panic or we need to freak out. But what we do need to do is take a kind of sober, undisguised look at what's happening, make sense of it, not just today, but in the days to come. And think hard about what is the way forward. What is the right model for conservatism, for the Republican Party, and I think we're going to be okay. Now, again, if you look at the tone of the media, it's very jubilant. Oh, the red wave has turned out to be a dud. It's a red mirage. This is one of the phrases the never-Trumpers are using. And the GOP is in serious trouble, and there is a grain of truth to it. I don't want to try to sugarcoat what I think was a bad result. But on the other hand, it was a bad result that had some good parts to it. So let's start with that. Let's start with areas where we did pretty well. And let's start with the simple fact that as of today, tomorrow, and January, of course, which is when power shifts, the Republican Party will have the House. So that is a very good thing. I was obviously hoping we would have the House by a bigger margin. It looks like it's going to be a pretty narrow margin. Who knows? Just a handful of seats. But having the House means that you control, and by you here I mean Kevin McCarthy, if he is elected as the Speaker, will control the committees, he will control the legislative agenda, and this means that nothing is really going to go through without Republican sign-off. Remember that bills begin in the House. Bills that become laws begin in the House, then they go to the Senate, then they go to the President. So Biden, if he wants to get anything through from now on, will need to negotiate with McCarthy. And in many ways, with regard to things that the administration is doing, the House will be alone in a position to sort of hog-tie the administration. And so that's a good thing. What about the Senate? Well, as of now, we don't know. As of now, the Senate hangs in the balance. It is possible the Democrats will retain their 50-50 majority, and I say majority because if it is 50-50, then Kamala Harris breaks the tie. It's possible Republicans will get to 51. It's possible, although I think unlikely, that Democrats will get to 51. But see, this is not the scenario that we were hoping for. We were actually hoping for, I think I told Debbie before the votes started coming in, I thought if we got 51, we were doing not so well. If we got 53, we were doing well. And if we got 55, this would be a great night. So you see right here that we are like at the low end of Republican expectations. And of course, at this point, I will be very happy if we just take the Senate by one seat, because then you have the House and the Senate. Now, you don't actually need both to block legislation. One is sufficient, but there are things that the Senate does exclusively. So I don't think this is likely, but let's say, for example, there's a Supreme Court opening in the next 2 years. Well, it turns out the House has nothing to do with that. Biden makes a nomination, it goes through the Senate. So if it's a Democratic Senate, you can virtually be assured that this nomination will go through. That will then be very bad because we now have a clear 5-4 and kind of a 6-3 majority. So it will then go to a 5-4 majority, but in some respects, we can't even always count on those 5 votes. So we'll lose the court. So these are very consequential decisions that are coming out of the midterms. And we're waiting to see if Adam Laxalt will beat Cortez Masto in Nevada. We're also waiting to see if Blake Masters can pull it out against Mark Kelly in Arizona. And it seems like Senate control hangs on the result of those 2 races. And of course, the runoff in Georgia, the very likely runoff in Georgia between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. Guys, you have helped to build MyPillow into the incredible company it is today. Now, Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back to my listeners. Right now, MyPillow is offering exclusive offers on their bed sheets, their 6-piece towel set, and even offering an extended 60-day money-back guarantee. Orders placed now through December 25th will have an extended money-back guarantee through March 1st. Now, the Giza bed sheets are marked down as low as $29.98. And believe me when I say you'll get a great night's sleep in these. The 6-piece towel set made with USA cotton, 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, 2 washcloths, typically retailing at $89.98, but now $39.98 with promo code Dinesh. Limited supply. Be sure to order now. Call 800-876-0227. That number again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com to get the discount. You need to use promo code DINESH Dinesh. I'm continuing my discussion of the results of the midterms. Now, we don't have all the results. And in Arizona, for example, we're waiting to see a very close race, at least close so far, between Kari Lake for the governorship and Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs has been leading throughout, and there are some people commenting in the media, social media, like, wow, Katie Hobbs is going to pull this off. Even they seem a little surprised. Kari Lake was ahead in the polls. I don't think that is a done deal. We're going to watch closely to see. I'm very hopeful that Kari Lake will pull it out. And that's an important race, I mean, personally for me, because of Kari Lake's embrace of the movie 2000 Mules, and also by the fact that I think she represents the future of the GOP. She has a marvelous ability to communicate. Her effectiveness in dealing with the media, I mean, I think is second to none. In that regard, she's in a way even better than DeSantis, even better than Trump. So we'll see what happens. That is a race we're kind of waiting on, and I'll be commenting on it as we get the results. Let me talk about some of the races that we do know about. Unfortunately, in the sort of races that I thought we might have a good chance, the wins were not our way. We would need a red wave to have these wins. And so, for example, Washington State, Tiffany Smiley lost to Patty Murray. I think had there been a real red wave, she would have won that race. In New Hampshire, Don Bolduc, he lost, and he lost pretty decisively. This was not a loss by 1 or 2 points. Maggie Hassan. So we have an interesting phenomenon here, which is different than we saw in 2020 and even in 2016, which is the polls overstated how well the Republicans would do. I don't mean the polls were, quote, biased, but what I mean is the polls predicted incorrectly that Republicans would do better. These were races that looked to be neck and neck. looked like Bolduc and Tiffany Smiley had a real chance. And yet, when you looked at the numbers, this was a pretty clean win for the Democrats in those areas. Let me talk a little bit about the Fetterman race with Oz. I mean, this is a little bit hard to swallow, I got to say. Fetterman is just a ridiculous individual. And the idea that the state of Pennsylvania would vote for this guy is surprising to many people. I mean, at some level, I guess, looking at it in a different light, you got to say that Fetterman's a kind of a genius. I mean, this is like a guy who should be in the Special Olympics, who enters the regular Olympics and wins. I mean, a guy with one leg who wins the race. This is unbelievable. How do you pull this off? What kind of campaign did he run? Was it simply that Pennsylvania would not stomach Dr. Oz? Was Dr. Oz too weird and too far out there that they were like, Fetterman, he might be retarded, but he's normal. He's a normal guy. He wears big, pants that come down below his knees, and he looks like he doesn't know what's going on, and many of us are like that. So, you know what? This is a guy we can identify with. He's a regular guy. He's going to speak for regular people. The remarkable thing with Fetterman is that not only did he beat Oz pretty decisively, but he did better than Biden. Now, that's not saying a whole lot, because with Biden, you got another guy who's a little clueless, another guy who's not all there. So with Fetterman and Biden, we seem to be getting a new sort of democratic model of the guy, the demented guy who still nevertheless somehow manages to win an election. So that was I think, a surprise, because although I thought, look, I was never a fan of Oz. I was at the Trump rally going back to Pennsylvania. This was right after 2000 Mules came out. And of course, Trump comes out, the rally goes crazy. I came out, the rain was pouring down, the crowd went wild. And then Oz came out, very tepid applause and some boos. And I mean, this was at the very beginning. So why would you want to bring forward a candidate from the beginning that does not excite the base at all? And the base is like, huh? So the only thing really going for Oz, I mean, of course, there was his fame as a kind of culture figure and a TV star. And then it was the sort of the fact that he was ordained by Trump. And here we have to take seriously Mitch McConnell's warning. Remember, Mitch McConnell said that this midterm is going to come down to the quality of the candidates. And I think McConnell was specifically referring to Herschel Walker. He's specifically referring to Dr. Oz. And, it's not that these are unaccomplished men. Herschel Walker is a big star in many ways. He's got a magnificent career. He's a man of accomplishment. So is Oz. By the way, so is Blake Masters in Arizona. But I think the question that McConnell was raising, and maybe I was a little hard on McConnell at the time, was, are these guys good as candidates? It's one thing to say some guy's accomplished, but in the case of Herschel Walker, you can have an accomplished guy who has, some skeletons in his closet or a checkered background, who's not properly vetted. And the point is, do you really want that guy to be running statewide when you know there is a piranha media that's going to try to bring out everything, that's going to ignore the sins of Warnock, focus on the sins of Walker, focus on criticizing Oz, doing their best to prop up Fetterman, doing their best to conceal Fetterman's mental problems. So in this environment, it appears that the Republican sort of room for error is extremely small. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless service provider. They offer broad coverage on dependable nationwide 4G or 5G networks. They're committed to providing their members with dependable wireless service and exceptional support while relentlessly fighting for our shared values. Patriot Mobile donates a portion of every dollar earned to support organizations that fight for First Amendment, religious freedom, and freedom of speech, Second Amendment right to bear arms, sanctity of life, and the needs of our veterans and first responders. Finally, a company we can trust. Partner with them today. You'll be supporting conservative values with every call. Go to patriotmobile.com/Dinesh or call 972 Patriot. Get free activation with the offer, code Dinesh, that's Dinesh. Special discounts are available for veterans and first responders. Join our movement. Make the switch today and a difference tomorrow. Go to patriotmobile.com/Dinesh or call 972-PATRIOT. I'm continuing my discussion of the midterms. Debbie and I were just joking a moment ago that since I'm in Florida with a hurricane coming, should I pretend to be buffeted by high winds as I continue to do my commentary? We were laughing about an episode in which one of these weathermen, who was obviously a kind of a drama queen, was acting as if this is an earlier hurricane, was flinging him from left to right. He could barely keep his balance. And then if you look in the back, you can see some people walking and a kid on a bike, and they all seem to be perfectly stable. So clearly this was an exaggerated account of what the weather was like. Well, in any event, let's turn back to our reflections, early reflections, or kind of initial reflections on what happened in the midterms. Look, I mean, I have a real mixture of emotions. I have a certain sense of trepidation because I'm asking myself, hey, have we lost our country? Is it the case that the American people don't share our values? I mean, that is a possibility. I don't think it is actually in the end, the possibility that I'm going to go with, but it's worth putting on the table because at some level you got to say, well, don't the voters know that we are in an environment of high inflation, high prices, unstable foreign policy, an open border, rising crime rates? Well, people do know these things, and we know they know because of Biden's approval ratings. And so this is what makes the midterm result all the more difficult to comprehend, and all the more reason why we should not look away from it or play any kind of a game of pretend. Why? Because although we are going to hold the House, we might even hold the Senate. That's a maybe. And under normal circumstances, you might go, well, that's not bad. We are advanced. We are moving forward. We're blocking their advance. So our troops are moving ahead. This was not a setback in that sense, but it was a setback against expectations. Because given the Biden wreckage, given his low popularity, given the fact that in the midterm, it is known, it is a kind of political truism that in the midterm, the party out of power wins seats. So put all that together, the natural wind, if you will, blowing in our direction in the midterm, add to it the one catastrophe on top of the other produced by Biden. I mean, this is not exactly an exemplary regime. The result has to be seen as very bad. Now, a big silver lining was Hispanics, and Debbie and I will talk about that. Hispanics coming in at 38 to 40% for the GOP. That is something with long-term consequences. I mention it, I'll pick it up in my discussion with Debbie. The other thing to notice is that there's a Florida model that DeSantis represents. DeSantis is, although in some corners of the media they're going, well, this shows that the MAGA wing of the party is finished and DeSantis represents the establishment. That is just nonsense. That's not the case. We're actually talking about which MAGA wing of the Republican Party. In other words, are we talking about the Trump wing? Are we talking about, does DeSantis represent? DeSantis came to power in the sort of wake of Trump. DeSantis is a Trumpster. Now, he's not Trump. There are differences between DeSantis and Trump. And this is something we're going to have to look at very carefully. One of the criticisms, and this criticism, by the way, not coming merely from the left, it's really coming also from the right, from Republicans, from our own side, and not just necessarily from rhinos or the Republican establishment. The question becomes, does Trump have serious weaknesses? Weaknesses in this case in recognizing who should be on his side, in recognizing who he should appoint to positions. Notice that when Trump was president, a number of these people stabbed him in the back. Didn't he know? Why did he appoint Christopher Wray to the FBI? Why didn't he fire Comey? And then when Trump picks candidates, why would you pick a guy like Oz? Why would you pick a guy like Herschel Walker if it is the case that there is all this stuff that people need to know about him? So these are all the critiques of Trump that are out there. I think we have to look at them. And we have to consider that DeSantis has strengths, which is that here is a guy who I think has the Trumpian spirit, has a MAGA vision, but is extremely disciplined. Now, he doesn't have Trump's charisma. He's the kind of guy who, he doesn't have that animal magnetism where he walks in the room and all heads turn to DeSantis. Kari Lake has more charisma than DeSantis. So DeSantis is methodical, he's matter of fact, but he's very effective in dealing with the media. I'm looking at the sort of betting odds. These are the people who put money on what's going to happen in 2024. And I see that in the betting odds, and this, of course, is to be expected. Let's remember, this is like one day after the midterms. The DeSantis line has now moved to the top. Trump is now in the middle and Biden is at the bottom. So in other words, the betting money is that if you were to have the election today, or if you were to put money on what's going to happen in 2 years, more people are betting that DeSantis will make it across the finish line than Trump. And interestingly, more people are betting that Republicans will win the presidency over the Democrats, that is, over Biden if Biden chooses to run again. All of this needs to be fleshed out a lot more. This is really just my initial take on this. And when we come back, Debbie's going to join me. We're going to talk together about where we go from here. You've heard me say it, I'm not a big fan of the flavor of veggies, but I have to admit when I'm in the produce section in the grocery store, all the vibrant colors of fruits and veggies look really good. Now, Dr. Howard at Balance of Nature explains that all the colors you see in the produce section equal nutritional variety. Different colors signify different key nutrients. So if you eat only your favorite 1 or 2 veggies, well, you're missing a whole world of vital nutrients. This is why Debbie and I take the 6 little fruits and veggie capsules each day. Each daily dose is made up of a blend of 31 different fruits and veggies. 31. So variety equals vitality. Give your body everything it needs with Balance of Nature. For a limited time, all new preferred customers get an additional 35% discount and free shipping on your first Balance of Nature order. Use discount code AMERICA. Call 800-246-8751. That number again, 800-246-8751, or go to balanceofnature.com and use discount code AMERICA. I'm back, and this time joined by Debbie, but not side by side. That's our usual posture where we sit in the same studio and we are able to chat kind of back and forth. But as I mentioned, Debbie is at home base. I am in Orlando. And so we're actually doing this by remote. It's kind of funny, honey, to see you. You're on the screen. I'm sure you can see me on the screen. It's kind of like we're both on, we're both on some TV channel and we're talking that way. Yeah. Now I got to say, and this goes back to, this goes back to 2016, 2020. We have a slightly different temperament or disposition. It's probably fair to say that I am in general more optimistic, more hopeful. I tend to think that things will come out okay. You tend to look at the downside, the dark side, and you expect it. You once told me that you think it's a little bit of a psychological protection because then you're not disappointed. It's almost like you saw it coming, and so it softens the blow. Talk a little bit first about this, if you will, and then let's apply that to your reaction to the midterms as we know them so far.
Yeah. Well, a good example of this optimism versus pessimism is the fact that when yesterday I saw that Nicole was forming into a tropical storm, and then I've been watching the weather forecast nonstop. It's going to become Hurricane Nicole today. And here you go, you're flying into Orlando. I text you and I go, honey, they're going to close the airport in Orlando. You cannot go. And you're like, honey, I'm already on the plane. So I'm like, oh my goodness, you're going to witness your first hurricane. So I was already kind of, the catastrophist there. So yes, it applies to politics as well, as you know. In 2020,
honey, before you turn to the midterms, one thing that really makes me laugh is the fact that you actually have an app on your phone where you monitor catastrophic events, including earthquakes all over the world, and so they're not even things you need to worry about. But you're like, Honey, take a look. There's a huge earthquake in Guam. Honey, take a look. There's a sea quake off the Tasmanian coast.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, what kind of...
A tsunami in Sumatra.
A tsunami.
Yes, that is true. I love weather phenomenon, and I also... It fits with my personality because I'm always looking for something like, that's major. But, with these hurricanes, someone was saying, oh my gosh, there's so many hurricanes. Well, ever since I was a kid living in South Texas, I've witnessed many hurricanes and they've been bad. So for me, it's not about, the weather, changing or anything like that. It's cyclical. Sometimes we get really bad ones, sometimes not so bad, but I've lived through many hurricanes. So, yeah.
Okay, as a pessimist, let's start by me asking you, what do you think was encouraging that you saw coming out of yesterday's results?
So the encouraging thing was the fact that Florida turned Rubio red. Get it?
Yeah, I get it. Absolutely.
Yes, that was phenomenal. I was extremely happy to see that Dade County turned red. When you were talking about the Latino vote, Ron DeSantis won 57% of the Latino vote. That is a solid vote for a candidate from Latinos. It's a big swath of the electorate in his reelection because he got a lot more votes. DeSantis gained among non-Cuban voters. He won 55% of the Puerto Rican vote. He that had voted for him in 2018, only 34%. And then among the other Latinos, and I was a little bit surprised that they threw in the Venezuelans with the Mexicans and the Colombians and other Latin Americans. He only won 50% of the vote. I would have thought Venezuelans would have voted more like Cubans, but I see that we have a long way to go when it comes to educating the people that have moved from South America, from socialist countries into America, because they do not understand the signs. In other words, in Venezuela, a lot of people tell me that it happened like a tsunami. They weren't expecting it. They never thought that it would become socialist. And then the voters were fooled by the socialists, right? They were fooled by Hugo Chavez, and I think that is the same case here, because the Democrats have the media. Hispanics tend to believe what they hear, and because they think that voting for a Democrat is voting for quote unquote democracy, they don't understand what they're voting for. They don't see the same, they don't see the signs, right? So it's my job, it's our job to educate these people as to what exactly they're voting for, what ideology in fact they are voting for. And I know for a fact that when they moved from Venezuela, and I talked to many Venezuelans, they don't want socialism. They reject socialism. So we have to make a better case that the Democrats stand for socialism and the Republicans stand for freedom. We have to be able to do that.
Let's pause. When we come back, we'll pick it right up. What some of us would do just to be young again, the simple things like climbing stairs, getting in and out of bed, taking a walk aren't always that simple. Too many aches and pains, but they can be simple because thankfully now there's a 100% drug-free solution to those aches and pains. It's called Relief Factor. Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation that's the source of aches and pains. The vast majority of people who try Relief Factor love it. They order more because it works for them. Debbie's a true believer. She can finally do the exercises she loves, like planks, push-ups, or stationary bike, all thanks to Relief Factor. It's been a real game changer for her and for so many other people. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of only $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 833-690-7246 to find out more about this offer. That number again, 833-690-7246, or go to relieffactor.com. You'll feel the difference. I'm back with Debbie, and when we left off, Debbie was talking about the fact that we need to communicate better. We need to communicate better to South Americans and Venezuelans for sure, but we need to communicate better to Mexican Americans, and we need to communicate better to the American people. So I think one thing it's fair to say is that in the midterms, Republicans ran in the expectation that essentially pointing to the failures of Biden was sufficient. Hey, look at crime. Hey, look at the border. Hey, look at what you're paying for gas. And the idea was, he's a bad guy. We're not going to say anything about ourselves. We're not Biden. That's our stance. And this was the Republican kind of message going into the midterms. Sure, Kevin McCarthy put out a commitment to America, but that was after he did that, it was almost like it was a one-day event. No one talked about it ever since. And so Republicans presented themselves really just as nothing more than the opposite of Biden. But it looks like as we go toward 2024, we're going to have a different approach. But honey, let's talk a little bit about the you mentioned the Venezuelans and the Cubans, but of course in Texas, we deal more with Mexican Americans. Your mom is Mexican American. Let's talk about some of the South Texas races, because I think that Republicans overall appear to have gotten 38 to 40% of the Hispanic vote overall. And that's huge, because that bodes very well for Florida, for Texas. It actually begins to shift the politics of California if it stretches over there. Let's talk about, we were disappointed, of course, that Mayra Flores lost. There was a kind of troika, Mayra Flores, Cassie Garcia, Monica de la Cruz. But we didn't lose all three of those races.
Yes. No, Monica de la Cruz, she won her race, 80,000 votes versus 67,000 votes for Michelle Vallejo, the Democrat. So she definitely made some headway there, and very, very happy about that. But with Mayra Flores, I think we should encourage Mayra to maybe run again in 24, because, she really only came within 10,000 votes of Vicente Gonzalez. And that is huge in the Valley. What people don't understand is that in the Valley, the Democrats have been an institution for over 150 years. So the fact that Republicans are even competitive as they have been, is huge. Obviously, we still need to, get it over the top. And again, I think it comes to education, because we have to make the case that faith, family, and freedom are the three things that Republicans can bring to the table in the Valley. As you know, every time we go to the Valley, I grew up in the Valley from the age of 10. And I saw the poorness of the Valley. When I came from Venezuela, I went to the Valley and I thought that I had entered a third world country. Well, at the age of 56, going back to the Valley, it still looks like a third world country. So we've got to educate the people in the Valley and let them know that, there is a better system down here. You do not have to keep voting Democrat just because your dad, your grandpa, his grandpa voted Democrat. You don't have to do it. You can break away from the Democratic Party. And I was also very happy to see that a Republican won a state seat in the House, a state, Texas state seat in the House. Janie Lopez, she beat the Democrat by quite a bit. She got 69% of the vote versus 30% of the vote, which is huge. So the Valley, I want to say that it may not have been a red tsunami, but it was definitely a little bit of a red wave down there, because again, Mayra didn't lose by that much. And so there is hope. Again, I think that just educating the people in the Valley about what they're voting for and why they should vote Republican is a really important thing. And I think we need to make sure that in the next 2 years, that is our mantra, honey.
These changes don't occur in one election or even in 2 election cycles. If you look at large changes in American politics, let's look, for example, at blacks who used to vote for the Republican Party in the era of Lincoln all the way till the New Deal. Blacks began to move over, but it took about 3 elections before they were solidly in the Democratic camp. Now, the Depression, of course, was the accelerator of that event. when you and I would talk to Ray Gonzalez, who was the previous candidate running as a Republican, basically Ray was running 40-60. So the Democrat would beat him without campaigning by 20 points. And that gives you the complexion of what the Valley is really like and what Myra was up against. She was in a Biden plus 14 or 15 district, and she still comes really close. And that tells me that this is sort of like one of those, it's a wave that's gathering strength, and what we want to do is nourish it. Look, if the Republican Party is the party of the working class, if it's the party of increasingly of black men, if it's the party of Hispanics, there's a solid majority there. Also, Republican ideas and conservative ideas of upward mobility, economic opportunity, a strong and yet prudent foreign policy, maintaining law and order, standing up for cultural decency and against woke craziness. This is not a losing agenda, but it's an agenda that has to be articulately presented. It has to come with a policy agenda. These are the things that we're actually going to do. And so while, yes, last night was discouraging, not what we had hoped for sure, not the red wave that we would have been celebrating. Nevertheless, it's a cautionary note. It means we got to think harder. We need to work smarter, and long term, we're going to be okay.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, and I'm excited to announce my original My Slippers are back in stock. You've made them a huge success, and now I've added smaller sizes, larger sizes, wide sizes, and all new colors. And with your promo code, you still save $90 a pair. Not only that, I'm having the biggest closeout sale ever on our sandals and slides for as low as $19.98. What makes my slippers different is my exclusive 4-layer design that you're not going to find in any other slippers. My slippers' patented layers make them ultra comfortable, extremely durable, and they help reduce stress on your feet. Wear them anytime, anywhere. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen now. Use your promo code to save $90 on my original My Slippers, or for as low as $19.98, you can get our sandals or slides. Quantities won't last long, and with my 60-day money-back guarantee, you can rest assured they'll be the most comfortable footwear you'll ever own.
Guys, it's always good to have I won't say a diversion from politics. What I mean is an enlargement of perspective. We've been really focused in this podcast on the midterms. We're going to be analyzing those probably for several days, but I don't want to subtract from my ongoing discussion of the Russian writer Mikhail Zoshenko. Let's remember that Zoshenko's work is relevant to politics in that he's writing sketches and stories about Soviet socialism. And hey, we are headed, it seems, in some ways, in that direction. Now, the story I want to talk about, one of his most famous, his most popular stories in Soviet Russia, is called The Story of My Illness. And it begins in kind of a strange way. Zoshenko basically says, I was asked recently by a magazine, and he names the magazine, Krotokill, asked me to write an essay on the defects of our regional hospital. And he says the magazine sent me a bunch of reports that had been filed by various patients from the hospital as kind of the research basis for me to write this article. And he goes, I could write the usual article with a lot of pontifications and a lot of analysis, but he said, I decided to sort of write a comic sketch instead. He says, now, the comic sketch I'm about to give you, he says, is sort of taken from real reports, but it's imaginary. In other words, I'm going to talk about an imaginary hospital, and I'm going to describe some imaginary events that happened there. So right away, we have to ask, why is Zoshenko engaging in this bizarre narrative device? Normally, if you have a short story, you just get into the story. You want to make a comic sketch, do it. After all, he's a writer of fiction, so he doesn't have to tell you this is an imaginary hospital. I think what Zoshenko's doing here is he's basically creating a very clever narrative device of pretending to be a kind of a journalist while at the same time protecting himself. He's actually going to describe real things that go on in Soviet hospitals, but see, he knows that there could be a knock on his door. Hey, Zoshenko, why are you making Soviet socialism look bad? Why are you exposing our hospitals as inefficient and horrible? And then he would say, oh, wait a minute, I've told you right up front in the story, this is an imaginary comic depiction, so I'm really just letting my imagination run wild. So we see here Zoshenko. Let's remember, this is a guy writing under Soviet control. This is a guy who can go to jail for one of these stories. Let's remember Alexander Solzhenitsyn served 8 years for making some negative remarks about Stalin. And we are talking here about the Lenin era, which was then followed, of course, by the Stalin era. So let's dive into this story, which begins, frankly speaking, I would prefer to be ill at home. So here's Zoshenko starting off by telling us, you know what, I had to go to the hospital, I went to the hospital, but things didn't work out too well. I probably should have just stayed home. So the whole message of the story is right there in the first sentence. You know what's coming. You know you're going to get a really almost a horrific depiction, but in comics touches of life in a Soviet hospital. Then he says, they took me to the hospital with typhoid fever. He says, I was really suffering. Now, Zoshenko writes a lot about his illnesses. You get the impression he was a little bit of a hypochondriac. He's always got some pain, something he's dealing with. So here he's dealing with typhoid fever. But when he gets to the hospital, he comes across a sign that is on the side of the hospital, drop off your corpses from 3 to 4, from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. So the hospital has a sign, there's a kind of a large bin or bucket, and apparently if you have dead bodies, you can't bring them at any time. It's got to be between 3 and 4, drop them off in the bucket right here. So right away, you know you're dealing with a hospital that is nuts. And then Zoshenko goes, I don't know how the other patients felt about it, but I jumped right to my feet when I read that sign. And he goes, you know, I was already running a temperature, so I had to kind of feel my head to make sure I wasn't kind of getting worse. And then he says, he goes up to the guy in the hospital and he says, hey, listen, why do you put up signs like this? This does not make the patients feel good. Is this really a good idea? Patients don't find it attractive to read such things. And the guy behind the counter goes, listen, you're a patient. The patients we get, they can hardly walk. They have high fever. He goes, sometimes there's like steam coming out of their mouth. He goes, this is not a time for them to be making criticisms of us. These are people who need something, we're able to provide it. So in other words, what he's basically saying is, listen, you can criticize later. You're here to be helped. And so he goes, listen, you need to get checked in. And so a big, large woman appears who then tells Zoshenko, all right, it's time to get you washed up. Let's go to the bathtub. And when we come back, we'll follow the adventures of the narrator. Kind of it's Zoshenko, sick with typhoid fever, now heading inside the Soviet hospital to have a wash. I'm continuing my discussion of Mikhail Zoshenko's story, the story of my illness. He's in the hospital, he's being taken to a bathtub, and he's about to plunge into the bathtub when he noticed some kind of motion in the water, and a woman emerges out of the bathtub. She's in the bathtub already. She's supposedly getting a bath. And he turns to the nurse and he goes, what the heck? What's going on? There's somebody already in the bathtub. And the woman goes, don't pay any attention to her. She's been here for a while. She gets in and out of the bathtub. You just basically get in with her. And so this guy goes, no, I'm not going to join her in the bathtub. What kind of an operation are you running here? And then the nurse turns to the medical assistant and goes, this is a very unpleasant patient that we have here with us. He's always complaining. Nothing is good enough for him. He doesn't like the sign. He won't join this woman in the bath. And then the other guy goes, listen, we are always better off when patients come to us and they're already unconscious. Why? Because they can't speak. They can't complain. We can do whatever we want to them and we're not going to be hearing from them. And then the woman speaks out loud and she goes, take me out of the water. And so the woman finally gets out. This guy gets in. But after he comes out, he's then moved to another room, and he's waiting for the doctor, a doctor who supposedly never comes, and slowly he's losing consciousness. He kind of essentially zones out. And 3 days later, he wakes up. 3 days later, he wakes up. He's evidently been in some kind of unconscious state, maybe even a coma. And he looks at the nurse and he goes, "What's going on?" And she goes, "Man, you have 9 lives." She goes, "A lot of people in your condition, they basically die. But you've made it. And that really shows that you're like a cat." And she says, so you're gonna recover from this illness. She goes, "But of course, I can't speak for other illnesses you may catch from other patients in the hospital." So in other words, the hospital is overcrowded. Lots of other people have problems. And so the nurse is telling him, "Look, we've gotten you through this one." Actually, think about it. They've given him no medicine, no treatment. He's just basically been there 3 days. He's better. But the nurse is like, "Who knows what else you may catch?" And sure enough, he catches whooping cough. And the nurse goes, "I believe you got this infection from the next wing over. That's our children's section." And she goes, "Sometimes we use the same trays to serve food that in this room that we do over there. So probably you've been eating off of a plate from a child who has whooping cough, and this is kind of why you came down with it." And so basically the patient goes, "All right, I've had enough of this. I need to get out of here. I need to go home." And so he makes his way home, and he's hoping his wife will see him and be extremely excited that he's returned. But his wife says this. She goes, "I'm a little surprised to see you. We thought you had died." So the wife apparently kind of knows what these hospitals are all about. And he goes, did you, how did you come to that conclusion that I died? And the wife goes, "Well, we actually got an announcement from the hospital, which basically said, on receiving this notice, please appear at this appointed time with the body of your husband." So evidently, either because the hospital is so bad that this happens all the time, or because they're so inefficient that somehow in error, they have sent a notice to the wife basically saying, "Bring your husband's body." And let's remember, don't just bring your husband's body at any time. Let's remember the sign from the beginning of the story: bring your husband's body between certain designated hours and drop the guy off. And then the narrator goes on, "Well, my wife apparently called the hospital and found out that it was a horrible mistake with the bookkeeping department. Somebody else," he goes, "it was somebody else who kicked the bucket, but they had gotten him mixed up with me." And again, the colloquiality of that, there was somebody else who kicked the bucket, this is very much the Zoshenko style. He's not writing a kind of treatise. He's not even writing in the kind of high style. If you read other Soviet writers, from the kind of delicacy of Chekhov or Pasternak, Maxim Gorky, Solzhenitsyn, these are people of sort of, you can see, cultivated literary style. And they take great pride in their elaborate, and you may say kind of almost the high style. Here it's the low style, and of course the low style very appropriate to comedy. And so the story concludes with Zoshenko saying, "Look, this is horrible." And he says, "Even though I was better, I didn't have my whooping cough anymore." So he has gotten over his original ailment and the ailment he caught at the hospital. He goes, "Just the whole episode has now left me with hypertension." So he now has hypertension just because, well, I guess it's a kind of PTSD from what he has been through in the hospital. And he goes, his wife goes, "Well, you have hypertension. Maybe you should go to the hospital." And he goes, "No, that's the one place I'm not going." He goes, "I just changed my mind and I didn't go." And he goes, and this is how the story ends, "And now when I get sick, I stay home."
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.